Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross, on the 1st of June. And what a hot day it has turned out to be. This evening, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the programme Siobhan Tolland. Hi, Siobhan, how are you?
Not too bad. Just gentle reminder, Tolland.
Well,
Or I'll start calling you Gordy.
Okay, well listen, Siobhan, we'll speak a lot more just shortly, but before we do that, let's get on with the coronavirus update for today. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 2,044,819 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,808,430 have been confirmed negative. 236,389 have tested positive. There are 478 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,669. This number only includes those who've died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 106 were in hospital last night, 10 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 3,267,290 people have now received their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,075,231 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,782 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. This is an increase of 0 since yesterday. The number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. And now for the Office for National Statistics update. The percentage of people testing positive for COVID-19, the positivity rate remained low. It shows early signs of a possible increase in England in the 2 weeks up to the 22nd of May 2021. The positivity rate shows early signs of a possible increase in Northern Ireland, increased in Scotland and remained low in Wales during the week ending the 22nd of May. Hospital admissions in England have remained below 1 per 100,000 in the 3 weeks up to the 23rd of May. The number of registered deaths involving COVID-19 in England and Wales increased in the week ending the 14th of May, however, and trends should be interpreted with caution as the previous week was affected by the early May bank holiday. The number of deaths that have mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate was 151 in the week ending the 14th of May. Deaths involving COVID-19 accounted for 1.5% of all deaths registered in England and Wales. The total number of deaths registered was 6.1% above the 5-year average. Trends should be interpreted with caution, as registrations were affected by the early May bank holiday. Mortality rates due to COVID-19 decreased for the third consecutive month in both England and Wales in April 2021. And now to tonight's main headlines and a cautious easing of COVID restrictions in Scotland. As the vaccination programme advances through the age group, some restrictions are to be eased sooner in areas where the case rates and prevalence of coronavirus allow. The First Minister outlined the first steps to Parliament and confirmed that Glasgow will move to level 2 at midnight on Saturday, the 5th of June. The following mainland local authority areas will also remain at level 2 while the situation with the virus is monitored closely. Eastern Bartonshire, East Renfrewshire and Renfrewshire, East Ayrshire, North Ayrshire and South Ayrshire, North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire, Edinburgh and Midlothian, Stirling and Clackmannanshire and Dundee. At the same time, from midnight on Saturday the 5th of June, these 15 mainland local authorities will move to level 1. Highland and Argyll and Bute, Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire and Moray, Angus and Perth and Kinross, Inverclyde and West Dumbarton, Falkirk, Fife, West Lothian and East Lothian, the Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway. All the islands currently in level 1 will move to level 0 at the same time due to sustained low numbers of cases. Everybody's encouraged to get tested to help stop the spread of COVID-19 by finding cases that might be missed, as around 1 in 3 people with COVID-19 don't have any symptoms. Well, Siobhan, the figures are going down, aren't they? And I guess the First Minister has to make a decision about unlocking, and she seems to have taken a slightly more cautious approach than was anticipated. Do you think this was warranted, given the rising numbers of the new variants that we've been seeing?
Yeah, well, if I'm honest, I was hoping she would be a little bit more cautious, actually. Watching Indy Sage on Friday, we have kind of reached the point in terms of the Indian variant where it's now become the main variant, especially in England, and we're likely to follow as we often do in terms we're usually a couple of weeks behind England in terms of infection rate. India and Nepal are in such a mess. They're on the brink of absolute breakdown because of the amount of cases they have. I think in Nepal they've got something like 48 ventilators, and they're getting they're getting requests for 200 to 300 per day. So it's really kind of tricky across there, and it comes back to the situation. We're not safe until every country in the globe is safe. This is a situation where the welfare of all of us is dependent on everyone feeling safe. There's new variants of concern found, I think it was in Vietnam just over the weekend. They reported something, a kind of combination between the Indian and the Kent variant as well. So we do have to be kind of very cautious. So I'm glad that she's done a kind of bit of a cautious report, a cautious approach. I saw Douglas Ross's comments, which is the usual open up at all costs type of philosophy, which I don't think is really, it certainly doesn't reflect, I think, the caution that Scotland as a whole tends to have. Good for Angus. I'm in Angus, which has moved down to 1, but Dundee has remained at 2. They had a massive spike over the last week or so. We were one of the lowest in Dundee, and then now it's moved to over 100 cases per 100,000. So it's quite a spike there. And I think that's the problem. The national figure looks relatively good, but in pockets, we're actually getting significant increases. So it is something to be really cautious about. Even if we're vaccinated, double vaccinated, we can still spread the virus. We don't know how well the vaccine protects us in spreading. So we still have to be very cautious.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you. You were talking about this new variant in Vietnam being a kind of combination of elements from both the Kent variant, so-called Kent variant, and the
Yeah.
so-called Indian variant. And the First Minister was saying that the virus appears to be running faster than we are. Do you think this is perhaps
Yeah.
a sign that the Scottish Government, at least, is anticipating a much tougher battle and a longer battle against COVID than perhaps the Westminster Government is anticipating?
I think the Scottish Government always has. I think they've always had a bit more of a coordinated approach to COVID, and an understanding that acting hard, acting fast is the best kind of course of action. If you look at what happened at Christmas, for instance, that fateful day on the 20th of December where
Yeah.
she brought us the terrible news, we were behind England in terms of COVID infection rates, but we acted faster. And I think that does reflect a kind of just a bit more of an understanding of what's going on. Um, how much we believe Dominic Cummings is a testimony here, but it does kind of ring true in a couple of areas where it did certainly feel uncoordinated at the start, and it doesn't seem to be that Westminster has learned many lessons. And that, I think, is the depressing element of it, is they just never seem to be learning. Um, I think that Scotland always has had that kind of just slightly better, slightly more longer term and more thoughtful and scientific based approach, I think.
Bearing in mind what you've just said, Siobhan, and the fact that the variant is, well, it's definitely changing, isn't it? And it changes
Yeah,
rapidly when it
yeah,
transmits over large numbers of hosts.
yeah.
Are we thinking here perhaps that the Scottish Government might take the so-called nuclear option and actually close the borders to people coming into Scotland if this new variant is proved to be crossing the boundaries, as it were?
Um, I suppose I think it's for me, it's the one big criticism of the Scottish Government at this moment in time is that I don't understand why they moved to the traffic light system. By Nicola Sturgeon's own admission before she changed to the traffic light system, it's like we don't know what becomes a red country. It could be too late by the time the virus gets in, by the time we change it to a red country. So I do think control of the borders is something that I get frustrated about. I don't think we've learnt that lesson. I would be much stricter in terms of border control if I was Nicola Sturgeon. I would make exceptions for people for essential travel, but I think the default message should be don't travel. And to be fair to the Scottish Government, that is their message, but I think the traffic light system kind of contradicts that a wee bit for me. I understand the need for travel for non-holiday reasons, I get that, but I think that should be the exception. We've had a strange situation where Germany has locked its borders to the UK, but Spain opened it practically on the same day. So there's not even a coordinated approach within Europe now. So it is a difficult thing to manage. And the problem with a virus, of course, is its very evolution is to find space within the population to grow and significantly grow. So we don't know where the next new variant will come from. If you think of the Indian variant, and we know this through the two vaccinations, after the first vaccination, under the norm, other variants, it works very well, something like 85-90% even.
Yeah.
But for the Indian variant, it's actually significantly lower. One of the figures quoted was something about 33%. So you're only really 33% protected with one jab.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Indian variant. So it kind of shows you need the two jags in order to be as well protected. So there is some danger here. And this is just the evolution of a virus. A vaccine comes in, and of course they're going to find ways to try and infect again. I think Westminster don't seem to have that approach. But I do think control of the borders, I think, is something that we need to do. We just need to look at places like New Zealand and Australia even. Australia has a state system and they manage their borders within that interstate system very well. And so it can be done.
Let me just ask you, Siobhan,
Yeah.
the United Kingdom has said in relation to independence that it should be a once in a generation opportunity. But with a virus where the generations take hours to get through, you could go through thousands of generations of virus and it will change before you can react to it, won't it? How do you think, if Scotland was independent right now, how do you think the Scottish Government should respond to this current crisis? Would you expect them to close the airports?
I would hope that they would. And I think fundamentally what it comes down to is it would be the decision that Scotland makes rather than the decision that's kind of enforced upon us. However, round about Christmas up until relatively recently, we did have a slightly different border control structure. But yes, I think it would. I mean, if we look at Devi Schreeder's comments, which has caused some controversy within the Tory party, and she said it quite a while ago, but it's kind of come back into the media again. If Scotland was an independent country, we would have been able to control that process much better. And part of the reason is not just about the boundaries, but Scotland worked on a suppression strategy. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're going to get zero COVID, although we got very, very close in terms of kind of deaths and hospitalisations last summer. It means that we try to suppress it as best we could. Westminster never, it was constant. Everybody was waiting, are you going to do this? Are you going to do this? They never came out and said we're going to do kind of a COVID suppression policy. And according to public health officials, Devi Schreeder included, that is your best strategy, to suppress as low as you can to deal with local outbreaks and to deal with the new variants that can come in. Because if you start extraordinarily low, then it allows you space to breathe when new variants or when new kind of new kind of areas pop up with COVID. England never had that. The Westminster system never quite. They just wanted to control at a certain level, and that's kind of how we went out of control last kind of November, December time.
Yeah.
Scotland was slightly different.
Siobhan,
It allowed us to. control. Sorry, our kind of COVID suppression strategy allowed us to control the December outbreak much better.
Okay, Siobhan. Well, listen, let's leave the subject of the disease itself for the time being, and let's talk about how the country recovers from it. And a Holyrood debate on Scotland's recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. The Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, opened a parliamentary debate outlining how the Scottish Government will lead the health recovery from the coronavirus pandemic today. Mr Yousaf said that the NHS and wider health and social services have adapted at a phenomenal speed and scale to meet the challenges of this pandemic, whilst maintaining exceptional standards of delivery. The Health Secretary said, "We must help those services and staff to adapt further as they continue to respond to COVID and face pre-existing non-COVID challenges. We will lead Scotland's recovery with an ambitious recovery plan that ensures our NHS addresses both the mental and physical health, as well as aspects of well-being that have been affected by the pandemic. I've committed to work cross-party and will produce our national recovery plan within the first 100 days of the new government." In this announcement from Mr Yousaf today, Siobhan, he appears to be saying that the Scottish Government is looking at all aspects of the way COVID has affected not only the population, but also the people in the health service who are treating the population. So this is a vastly more ambitious plan than I've heard from anywhere else. And it must, by its nature, I guess, mean hiring more NHS staff.
Yes, and actually, as it turns out, of course, we've kind of got the highest amount of NHS staff. We've had a massive increase in NHS staff. I think that will be covered later. So it's a good thing. I think that it's wider than the NHS, though. Health is much, much wider, and I think that we need to start thinking COVID recovery in terms of all aspects of society, because we all know, the inequalities, the poverty, deprivation, these are things that cause the kind of long-term health things. So we do need a short-term strategy, but we also need a much longer-term strategy to actually start picking up the economy and start thinking, like you said, you mentioned the word well-being, and I think that's it, isn't it? It's beginning to develop a society and develop a practice where everybody begins to benefit and everybody's hope begins to reappear on the horizon. And hope is a massive thing. It sounds maybe a wee bit twee to say that, but hope is something that can be massively, massively important as we move forward in terms of our well-being, physical as well as mental well-being as well. So it's a good strategy, and I think that I'm liking Humza as the Health Secretary. I wasn't too sure at first, but I think he's very articulate. He seems very, very focused and very determined to kind of move things forward in terms of the immediate health concerns that we've got. We've got the backlog of health problems that weren't quite able to address during the COVID pandemic as well. So there is an issue with that. I'm waiting on an appointment, and I phoned up just to find out where it was, where I was at, and she says we're absolutely inundated. It just people couldn't come during the COVID pandemic, but now can. So we have a massive backlog to pick up as well. It's about building a society where well-being is good, and not using the NHS as a patch on for when we all become ill. We need to start preventing these illnesses,
Yeah.
and that comes from kind of hope for jobs, good jobs, well-paid jobs. Things like the child payment is a good start, but actually reintegrating a sense of community and a sense of togetherness for people's well-being. Community and community groups and that's just your social group.
Yeah.
The groups that your working group, the people that you speak to at the bus stop, these kind of things that we've all missed during the pandemic. It's important to start reintegrating that back as well, so we all get a sense of connection again, because there's been a lot of isolation. So it's from the small things that can make a big impact to the big mental health and physical health things that we're going to have to deal with, because the pandemic has put a lot of things on hold.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on now to something perhaps a little bit more optimistic. And Glasgow is to plant 18 million trees as the city readies for the COP26 climate summit. Plans have been announced to increase Glasgow and Clyde's woodland by a fifth in preparation for the COP26 climate summit to be held in November this year. The Clyde Climate Forest, launched today, will see planting schemes across the region with the aim of creating a large interlocking green network, including a biodiversity corridor. The project is a partnership between local authorities, Scottish Forestry, Nature Scottish Environment Protection Agency, Public Health Scotland and the Glasgow Centre for Population Health, with the Woodland Trust providing £400,000 of funding. It's interesting, this one, Siobhan, because I'm often very fond of telling people who visit Glasgow that it's a city that's got as many trees as it has people. It seems to be a very dear green place. And to see the Scottish Government and all of these agencies getting together just to show the world just how green the city is, has got to obviously put it in the spotlight during COP26.
I do think that I think it's a great initiative actually, and I think that what it is trying to do in terms of just it's like you were saying, it's like recreating the kind of eco corridors and stuff, and so the reconnecting of the woodlands allows a much better biodiversity. I was reading today as well that this can also help migration of animals. When the kind of the weather begins to change a little bit, so it's all about and a lot was about mitigating some of the impacts. I was reading about the increase of the canopies that trees provide. It can reduce the force of the rain and the wind that's going to come. I mean, living in Glasgow, you'll know that better than I do, that it's quite a kind of rainy city, so there is that kind of, it mitigates some of the effects here, and offers literal protection against the weather for people in Glasgow. And one of the things that they're talking about is trying to do this in deprived areas as well, because of course that's some of the areas that's most exposed, literally as well as metaphorically in terms of poverty. And so it's a great initiative, and I do think it's one of those things, isn't it? I went to it was a talk by Stephen Gethins, and he's just brought out a book about Scotland's role in the international world, and he was talking about COP26 as an opportunity that we may not as a country be officially part of this process, but as a country we could show the world what we can do. And I think that this kind of 18 million trees thing is actually one of the examples of what we can do, and it's a great ambition, and it's absolutely hugely ambitious as well. Let's get trees and get even more trees. There's also something, I think, talking about hope earlier on, but there's something psychological about a lot more greenery, especially in built up areas. And I do think there is that element that it provides kind of just a much nicer environment, especially for kids and families in built up areas. And I think that it's something, especially in a post-COVID era, we do need to think seriously about. So it kind of has these other side effects as well as the eco one.
I've also heard, Siobhan, that trees, obviously, they fix carbon, don't they? They extract carbon dioxide from the air and turn it into wood. And actually, they're cleaning the air as they basically breathe in and out like we do. So trees really should be an essential part of any community to help clean up the air.
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting one because it's slightly controversial, because sometimes planting new trees can actually, it's more carbon to plant them. But actually, what they're doing is by expanding the existing woodland, that can help, and I think that's one of the strategies as well. But you're right, in the longer term, it has a massively useful impact. Photosynthesis is the term for it, isn't it? It kind of sucks it up and then puts it out. But yes, absolutely, it's a great thing. It really is. I'm looking forward to other cities taking that approach, and you may know that Dundee's just obviously, we've moved the next step forward in the Eden project, which has a very, very similar philosophy of the kind of the natural world coming back into the urban space. And if you look at the plans, it looks exactly like that. And it's that introduction of green spaces within urban areas, I think, that the Eden project is certainly going to be looking at, and it'll be beneficial. So I think that there's other things in the making that hopefully other cities will take heed from the Glasgow example.
Well, let's hope so, Siobhan. Certainly gives hope to many people that the city is going to be even greener by the end of this year. Now,
Yeah.
talking of Greens brings me with a neat little segue to our next story. And the Greens have called for the eviction ban to be reinstated. The Scottish Government must urgently consider reinstating eviction bans across the country for as long as COVID restrictions remain in place, the Scottish Greens co-leader Lorna Slater, MSP, said today. Speaking in response to First Minister's update to the Parliament today, Ms Slater highlighted the significant impact the pandemic has put on household budgets. Lorna Slater said that the First Minister is aware of just how challenging the pandemic has been on household budgets and that many have spent much of the last year on the furlough scheme, earning 80% of what might have been already a low wage, whilst others have lost their jobs completely with little hope of finding another. Ms Slater pointed out that the eviction ban has been a lifeline for many of those people who express concern that many may face eviction if they can't cover their rent. However, job prospects just aren't there yet. The Greens co-leader finished by calling on the First Minister to give urgent consideration to reinstating the eviction ban across the whole country for as long as the restrictions remain in place. Now, I don't know about you, Siobhan, but I have been impressed greatly by Lorna Slater and the things that she has been saying and doing recently. This one makes perfect sense, doesn't it? After the recent actions of the United Kingdom border enforcement in Glasgow, this surely has got to be almost right at the top of the list, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, absolutely. And I think that the last time this was up for review, I seem to recall having a conversation about this as well. I mean, it's like Alison Watson, the director of Shelter, had said that, Scotland has a progressive housing policy, but, we could go one better. There should be no one that should be evicted because they can't afford to pay their rent. There should always be other alternatives before we get to that point. There should always be other alternatives. I think it's important as well as kind of one of the things that Alison was talking about was and this kind of comes back to how the Scottish Government has treated the COVID response. If you're uncertain, then act with caution. Now, we don't know what the economic impacts are going to be at this moment in time. We will be very lucky if they're minimal. I think it's likely to be relatively drastic. So we have to work with caution in that respect, and exactly the same way the Scottish Government are doing the COVID strategy. So that means effectively stop the evictions until we know what's happening, until we've got over the worst. I personally would ban evictions for unpaid rent, full stop, end of story. It's another reason for good social housing as well, actually, because it takes that pressure off landlords, etc., etc. There isn't that tension that can sometimes exist between someone's need for a profit and someone's need for a home. And you'll notice that the Social Justice and Fairness Commission start rethinking about housing as a profit rather or an asset and housing as a home again. And I think that the no eviction stance certainly fits in with that prospect. Everyone deserves a home.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves a home. And if they can't afford it, then we need to think of ways to help them afford it. Eviction should never be something in a civilised society. So this is why I like the Greens' influence on the SNP.
Okay. All right, Siobhan, thank you very much for your answer there. Anyway, we are moving on, and research has revealed multi-billion-pound Brexit hit to services exports. The SNP has said that only by becoming an independent country can Scotland escape the damage being wreaked upon the economy and businesses due to the Tories' extreme Brexit deal, after new research revealed the multi-billion-pound hit to the UK's services exports. The findings published by experts from Aston University found that services exports were £113 billion lower than they would have been if the UK had remained in the EU. In stark contrast, Ireland's cumulative service exports were £126 billion higher over the same period, based on projections. It comes a week after separate statistics released by the ONS revealed a plunge in trade between the UK and the EU due to the impact of Brexit and the pandemic. We're often told, Siobhan, that Scotland is an exporting nation, and we always think of that in terms of things like food and drink and maybe engineering. But often the services industry is a kind of unseen, invisible money earner. Do you think the impact on the services industry in Scotland is being felt as badly as it is in the rest of the UK?
I'm not sure actually. I mean, Scotland is, Scotland does have quite a kind of a large service industry, so probably yes. I think one of the interesting things about the report was, one of the professors, June Du, was talking about COVID has kind of slowed down some of the companies moving out of the UK because
Yeah.
of Brexit, because you can't actually relocate during that kind of mid-COVID lockdown. So 2020 wasn't included in that study, so we
Okay.
don't even know the most recent impact. And actually, rather ironically, some of the Brexit impacts has been staved off because of COVID as well. Because so we might see a wee bit, and that was one of the things that the report mentioned, that there might be a bit of an exodus in a post-COVID, which is even worse. Since I think it's since December, the UK has refused to get into any discussion over this, despite the fact that the House of Lords raised alarm in March about various different companies and various different trades being under kind of being kind of struggling because of Brexit. Financial services is one of the big ones, and if you think of the UK, financial services is one of the UK's biggest industries. It's certainly bigger. Certainly, if you think about Scotland and oil, the financial services is bigger, and the UK is more reliant on financial services than what we ever would be as an independent nation on oil. So it's actually quite a big industry, and that was one of the first ones to start moving away. I think it was, you remember that even just in
Yeah.
2016, you remember stories of going, oh, they're leaving because they wanted seamless trade, and that's the joy of the EU, isn't it?
So,
So we are in a bit of a pickle.
so you think perhaps, Siobhan, that the effect of COVID is hiding the real damage that Brexit is doing to the service industries, and that there could be many hundreds more financial service companies from the UK who might even have migrated and relocated in the continent since this report was written?
Yeah, she says, and I'm going to quote, the trend of services companies moving away from the UK is likely to accelerate as COVID restrictions are lifted and trade resumes. The COVID period created difficulties in moving businesses and individuals, which slowed down the relocation process. So yeah, it's likely to speed up in a post-COVID. So what we're going to have is, and this is the problem, and this is almost what lets the UK off the hook a wee bit, is that there's going to be this complex kind of post-COVID situation that's mixed with a Brexit exodus.
So do,
And it's going to be quite hard to tease out what caused what, you know?
do you think it would be tempting? I know we're speculating here, Siobhan, but do you think it would be tempting to the Prime Minister to allow the COVID emergency to run on a bit longer so that the real effect of Brexit isn't felt for some years to come?
Yeah, no, I didn't really want to get into that kind of
Um,
speculation. I think to be fair, it would that would require a bit of long-term thinking that I'm not sure the UK government has anyway. But yeah, that's maybe slightly conspiratorial for me, Gordon.
I just thought I'd play the devil's advocate for once. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. There's the thing is, we know now that there's no depths to which the UK government will stoop. We know that.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see, Siobhan, I guess, when the true figures come out after the COVID pandemic is finally under control. Anyway, moving on to more international affairs now, and the European Union is to blacklist Belarus airlines ahead of economic sanctions. According to a briefing by 3 diplomats, the European Union is preparing sanctions on Belarus National Airline and around a dozen top Belarusian aviation officials as a stopgap measure before economic sanctions following the forced landing of a passenger plane. The proposed asset freezes and travel bans are part of a package of new sanctions on Belarus from the EU states, which are outraged that a Ryanair flight was pressed to land in Minsk on May the 23rd to arrest a journalist, Roman beg your pardon, I'm going to say this again. Roman Protasevich and his girlfriend, a student, Sofia Sapiga. The European governments, which described the incident as state piracy, say that they're looking at targeting sectors that play a central role in the Belarus economy to inflict real punishment on President Alexander Lukashenko. They could include bond sales, oil sector and potash, and a big Belarusian export. Before imposing such economic sanctions, the EU is expected to agree by June the 21st, when the EU foreign ministers meet, smaller sanctions list on individuals and 2 entities as a quick intermediary response, the diplomat said. Well, the sanctions are still under discussion, and the EU ambassadors, as early as Friday, could pre-approve banning overflights and landing in the EU territory by Belarus airlines, allowing EU ministers to formally sign off on them later in the month. The UK has already suspended the air permit for Belarus national carrier Belavia. The EU is expected to do the same, the diplomats have said. Now, we know what's been going on, don't we, in Belarus with essentially the hijacking of a plane by the Belarusian authorities. Do you think that the response of the European Union is proportionate to what has been done, or do you think this is perhaps maybe not enough or too much?
I mean, I think it's relatively proportionate. I think that there seems to be, I mean, I was reading today as well that there seems to be a lockdown in preventing Belarusians from leaving the country as well. So there is a wee bit of a kind of quite a strong, I don't want to say dictatorship, but a very strong force on its citizens seems to be putting into place. But yes, I think it is proportionate. I think that it really did cross many political, moral, and ethical lines to arrest, to force an airplane down and then arrest a journalist and blogger for the crime of opposition. Now, if we can be so well organised and hold the Israeli government to international law, in the same way that we're determined to act against Belarus, then that would be great as well, because I do think that there is an element of we can't pick and choose when morality is here. We saw the Israel situation. All we really want is for the Israeli government to stick to international law. We're not asking for much in that respect. So I think if the European, if the EU could kind of come together and help with that situation as well, that would be even better. But yeah, I think it's proportionate.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you for that. Now moving to America, Joe Biden marks the Tulsa massacre as the US confronts its legacy of racist violence. Today, President Biden became the first sitting US president to visit the site of the massacre of hundreds of black Americans by a white mob in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as they marked one of the worst chapters in the country's history of racial violence. President Biden met with a handful of surviving members of the Greenwood community on the 100th anniversary of the killings and announced steps to combat inequality, the White House officials have said. They include plans to expand federal contracting with small disadvantaged businesses, invest tens of billions of dollars in communities like Greenwood that suffer from persistent poverty, and pursue new efforts to combat housing discrimination. An administration official said that the president will address the US legacy of racist violence and challenges to unity ahead. President Biden cannot fulfill his promise to restore the soul of the nation without recognizing the complexity of US history, the official said. In a proclamation today, Biden asked all Americans to reflect on the deep roots of racial terror in our nation and to recommit the work of rooting out the systematic racism across our country. President Biden, who won the presidency with a strong black voter support, made fighting racial inequality a key platform of his 2020 campaign and has done the same during his short tenure in the White House. The president's visit to Tulsa was in sharp contrast to a year ago when ex-President Trump criticised Black Lives Matter and other racial justice movements and planned a political rally in Tulsa on June the 19th, the Juneteenth anniversary that celebrates the end of US slavery in 1865, only postponing the rally after widespread criticism. Public awareness about the killings in Tulsa on May the 31st and June the 1st, 1921, which has not been taught in history classes or reported by local newspapers for decades, has grown in recent years. White residents shot and killed up to 300 black people and burned and looted homes and businesses, devastating a prosperous African-American community after a white woman accused a black man of assault, an allegation that was never proven. Insurance companies did not cover the damages and no one was charged with the attacks. It seems to me, at least, Siobhan, that Joe Biden is not afraid of confronting racism. He's not afraid of criticism from the American far right when he does this. Do you think Biden's tenure has marked a real sea change in the entire attitude to racism in the American political system?
I hope so. I think that one of the interesting things I think about this and the Tulsa massacre and the recognition of that massacre is it's beginning to do something that I don't think the US or the UK, for that matter, has ever really managed to do much within its history, and that is be self-aware of its own history and what it's done, of the brutality that it has inflicted upon people for centuries. I think a Czech writer called it struggling against forgetting, and it's that balance of a country atoning and coming to terms with what it did within its past. And I think that the US and the UK have never really come to terms with that. That's never really had that self-awareness. If you look at Germany, their level of self-awareness in terms of the Holocaust is actually really quite impressive. There's 400 monuments in Berlin alone, which lays bare the people that died and were murdered as a result of the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a compulsory part of the curriculum in Bavaria. Visiting Dachau is an essential part of the curriculum. That's what kids do. It's essential. So that kind of level of self-awareness and understanding of your past in order to learn from your future is something that's actually quite present in Germany, but not anywhere near to the degree in America or in the UK either. We've only just recently, so in Berlin, you've got 400 monuments that recognise the murders that happened. We're only just becoming aware that the monuments that we have were symbolic of murders, were murderers, were slave owners, were brutally suppressed countries. It's also important to note as well that in 1919, the British Army killed 369 people in India as part of a kind of brutal suppression. Rudyard Kipling called the guy, he just needed to do what had to be done. There was 1,200 injured and 369 murdered by the kind of lead in the British Army. So we're not immune to that. So only 2 years later it happened in America. So there's that element of a complete lack of self-awareness. And I think the White House quote, and you quoted that one yourself, that we cannot fulfill the promise to restore the soul of the nation without recognising the complex of the history. I think that's a huge cultural, social and political turning point of a nation that perhaps is beginning to think about their history and the brutality of that history and the impact that it's had. You may remember after the George Floyd and the discussion in Scotland from the BAME community centred on rethinking our education. And I think that taps into that. And I think it taps into a country that's attempting to think about their past and to atone for their past in order to move forward. It's unsure whether Biden will talk about reparation when he goes, but it's certainly something that's been on the agenda for Tulsa and for other communities as well. Financial reparation, but symbolic of a kind of a wider reparation of what that nation did to its own people. So I think it is a good start. And if you think of just a year ago, as you said yourself, that Donald Trump literally wanted to rub it in the face of the people of Tulsa. We've come a long way in that respect, and I think it's a really positive step forward. I only hope, for the nation's sake, for the US's sake, that they can begin to heal or begin the processes of healing. I think the UK has got a lot further to go now because the UK has no self-awareness in terms of its imperialist, colonial and bloody murderous past, should I say.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you for that. Okay, moving on now back to Scotland this time. The new national service has been established to improve the quality and management of healthcare construction and refurbishment projects across NHS Scotland. NHS Scotland Assure brings together experts to improve the quality and support the design, construction, maintenance of healthcare developments. I beg your pardon. A world-first interdisciplinary team will include microbiologists, infection prevention and control nurses, architects, planners and engineers. Commissioned by the Scottish Government and established by NHS National Services Scotland, the service will work with healthcare boards and ensure that healthcare buildings are designed with infection prevention and control practice in mind, protecting patients and improving safety. The benefits of NHS Scotland Assure include increased patient safety, stronger relationships with clinical teams, an increase in public and professional confidence, the cohesion between healthcare and construction teams, reduced costs, greater sustainability. The NHS Scotland Assure consists of 8 new services supporting the management of risk in healthcare builds across Scotland. For some services, elements are already delivered across the system, and where this is the case, enhancements will be made. So it looks like the Scottish Government may be, perhaps, Siobhan, responding to some criticisms, particularly of some hospital builds recently in Scotland, which faced, well, let's face it, some infection control problems. I think we can't really ignore that. Both the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow and the new Hospital for Sick Children in Edinburgh both faced problems, didn't they? So do you think the Scottish Government is really responding to this and trying to make sure that these problems don't happen again?
I think so, and I think that it that wasn't a good that wasn't a good part of our history in terms of our healthcare. It was quite shameful, really. I'm not putting blame here, but it wasn't. Kids shouldn't get infected, and vulnerable kids should not be infected, and kids shouldn't die as a result of these type of things. But I think there's almost a connection here between thinking about our past and atoning and moving forward, isn't it? In a very short term, I think that what the Scottish Government seems to be doing, and good on them for doing this, is fixing past errors and making sure the best way they can that it won't happen again. And it's a world first, so again, it's an innovative way, and it to me it shows an attempt to accept past errors and move forward and find a way to make that better in the future. So I do think it's a great thing, and I think that it's probably the best response that they could have done under the circumstances, because we had to, or the Scottish Government or the nation had to atone in some way for that, because it wasn't good at all. So yeah, no, I think it's a positive thing to come from it, and I hope that if it can deliver half of what I'm hoping it can deliver, then it's going to be great. I know that it's involving microbiologists are going to be involved in stuff as well. It also crossed my mind that they might have one eye on another pandemic too, that they'll build in terms of immunology and kind of pandemic responses as well. So that could have implications for other building works as we move forward in terms of ventilation spaces and so forth, and just infection control. It's one thing that we've not been good at. I mean, one of the things that the scientists keep telling us is that we need to think about better ventilations in schools, for instance, but maybe as we move on in a longer term, it has possibilities for that as well. So it's a good response, and I think it's a fair response. And it's a good testimony to the Scottish Government that puts their hands up and says, we did get this wrong, but here's what we're going to do and fix it. That to me, that makes me quite proud that we're open enough to accept errors and correct them.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you very much for that. Okay, still staying in Scotland, and the Best Start grant boost for parents. Low-income parents are being encouraged to apply for the financial support they're eligible for. This year's Best Start Grant school age payment opens today for families who get tax credits or certain other benefits and have a child who was born between the 1st of March 2016 and the 28th of February 2017. Even if the child is not starting school, eligible parents and carers should still apply before the closing date of the 28th of February 2022. The payment is part of 5 family payments delivered by the Social Security Scotland. It also include the Best Start Foods, Best Start Grant, Pregnancy and Baby Payment, Best Start Grant Early Learning Payment and the Scottish Child Payment. The Best Start Foods payments are set to increase to £4.50 a week on the 1st of August to support low-income families to buy healthy food for children under the age of 3. To maximise the support available to families, income thresholds that apply to certain qualifying benefits are also set to increase. Obviously, it looks like the Scottish Government is responding to another need. We've talked many times about child poverty in Scotland, and I'm seeing over and over again and reading the news, the Scottish Government making efforts to try to redress the balance for people on the lowest incomes. Do you think that this eventually, we've got Social Security Scotland now, if the country does vote to become independent, that we could actually do far better than this?
Yes, I mean, I think that I was reading the Social Justice and Fairness Commission's report the other day, and the eradication of poverty is the sole purpose, and well, certainly in that report, and that would be seen as the sole purpose, or the main purpose for an independent Scotland would be to eradicate poverty, and that would be the priority that we would. So yes, we can go much further when we're independent and when we have the kind of the economic, the taxation levers and so forth, and all the social security, because we've only got 15% at this stage. But this is, again, it's a taste of what we can do, and I think it shows where our priorities are. Parents first, and that's that's how I saw the SNP manifesto as well. It's just like put parents at the core of this, because poverty, I've said this a million times, but poverty in kids is completely and utterly undeserved. Not that any poverty is deserved, to be fair, but the impact of poverty on children will be lifelong if a kid is brought up in poverty. So £4.50 a week doesn't sound that much, but when you're skint, £4.50 will be that difference between a can of formula or not a can of formula. You know what I mean? So there is that element. So it's about feeding kids, making sure that they're happy, they're healthy, they're warm, they're clothed, and these are massively, massively important things. And this is just the beginning of what we can do. I think that the independence argument does ride on an anti-poverty initiative, because it's the one area that we know we can work on, and it's the thing that everyone knows we can benefit from. Every single person in society will benefit when there's lot less poverty, because it's not just the poor that doesn't benefit. It's not just the health issues. It's not just the lack of hope and the deprivation and the isolation that comes with poverty. Whole of society doesn't benefit when we have poverty in our society. So it's a massively good start. The Citizens Advice Bureau had mentioned a few months back that one thing the Scottish Government can do is push the uptake of that, and it seems that they've certainly listened to that, and they've put that forward now. So if anybody out there is actually on some kind of benefits, it's worthwhile looking up. The Citizens Advice Bureau has good information. Scottish Government website has good information as well. There's a number and an email you can phone to find out whether you're eligible. Every single bit of money helps, I think, when you're skint, and these things are, and this is the difference in the cultural change. These things are a right. These are not something that the state's handing out because you've been a good wee girl or whatever. These are a right. This is about making sure kids do not grow up hungry, cold, or distressed because of poverty. So these are things that we need to kind of get. That's the cultural change, I think, isn't it? Everyone has the right to be fed, to be clothed, and to be housed. And that's a right. It's not a privilege.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you for a fulsome answer. And final story tonight, when the NHS Scotland staffing reaches record highs. The staffing levels in Scotland's NHS, I beg your pardon, have reached a record high after an increase of almost 9,000. The highest number of medical and dental consultants, qualified nurses and midwives, and allied health professionals are now employed. The Health Secretary, Hamza Yusuf, said the Scottish Government is committed to remobilising the NHS in the weeks and months ahead. The figures show that NHS Scotland's staffing levels have increased by 6.2%, or 8,955.3 in the last year, and 2.5%, or 3,759.2 in the last quarter. Since 2006, NHS Scotland's staffing levels have increased by over 25,000. And at March 2021, NHS Scotland's workforce numbers are at a record high at March 2021, including record high numbers of medical and dental consultants, qualified nurses and midwives, and allied health professionals. Medical and dental consultants, including director-level consultants, have increased by 3.3%. Qualified nurses and midwives, including interns, up 3.7%, and allied healthcare professionals up 2.4% in the last year. NHS Scotland has higher staffing per head at 27.9 staff per 1,000 people in Scotland. That's as of March 2021, while in England it's 20.9 as of January 2021. Now, Siobhan, I'm sure you must be pleased to know that the Scottish NHS is setting records for employment. But people often say that that the public sector gets too large. But surely when we're looking after people, the public sector can never be too large, because unless you look after people, they can't work, they can't be economically active, can they?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that investment in our public sector at this moment in time is probably one of the big things we can do in order to rebuild the economy and create a COVID recovery as well, because it has a dual impact, doesn't it? If we invest in people and invest in these public services, then we're creating jobs, we're creating money that can circulate into the economy. It's not the rich people that spend the money in the economy, they hide it away. This is good economics if we give it to kind of ordinary people that will spend it. So it's got that dual impact. It'll be better for the economy, but it also will be better for our health. This kind of it's quite a conservative capital C argument, isn't it, that we spend too much on the public service, but that only comes from a strategy where you don't think that government should be involved in the kind of allocation of care. Now, public health officials will probably tell you across the board that it was the countries with a relatively good public health or a public service that had good strategies for COVID, because they were relatively robust and they understood how to work a public response rather than a private response. If we look at England, we'll know that they did it through a privatised rather than a public health response. So yeah, for sure, this is a great thing, and I think that the idea that we kickstart the NHS and we kind of invigorate it and build it to something that we can be really, really proud of, and that will offer the health and care that we really need at this moment in time. It's very, very ambitious, but it's like the zero, it's like the COVID suppression policy. The only thing we can keep doing is try again to get this right and make sure we build the best NHS that we can. And so it's a good start. Now I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen. And then, the introduction to the obviously the National Care Service as well is going to be another element of that.
Okay. Well, listen, Siobhan, we have just about run out of time for this evening, so I'm sorry we're going to have to end the programme there. But just before I leave you tonight, just a reminder that Broadcasting Scotland is having a crowdfunder, and we need your help to make sure the programmes that you enjoy. So if you like what you see tonight and you want to see more of it, then you can become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland by following the instructions on your screen now. But that's about it from me tonight. It just remains for me to thank Siobhan Tolland. Thank you, Siobhan, for being such an excellent guest.
Tolland.
Oh, sorry, Siobhan. You must have the most mispronounced name in the industry.
I kind of do, and I've inherited the kind of annoyance from my father.
All right, Siobhan Tolland, thank you for being such an excellent guest, Siobhan. All right. Thank you again. Anyway,
Take care.
from a humorous studio this evening, and I'm sweating here in the heat. It's a very good evening to you. Sorry about that.